The glass vault of the Galactic Exchange Tribunal floated above Varda Prime's equatorial storm band, a ring of law suspended over weather violent enough to erase cities, and High Commander Ben of the Krellix Merchant League liked the symbolism more than he admitted. He stood at the primary dais in layered cobalt armor, crest blades polished to mirror shine, while beneath him 97 delegations watched trade routes pulse across the chamber's central hollow. Freight, debt, salvage, futures. To Ben, that lattice was the only honest scripture in civilized space. Species rose when they understood value, and they declined when they confused emotion with policy. The human delegation occupied a modest tier, 3 levels below the principal creditor blocks as protocol required for developing strategic economies. That category had annoyed humans for decades and amused Krellix for longer. Ben let his gaze rest on Ambassador Elena Morrison only once, before turning away, a small insult delivered with perfect bureaucratic timing. Humans, he had told his board, were operationally useful and strategically unserious, clever with adaptive engineering and stubborn in negotiations, yet still trapped by what Krellix analysts termed attachment drag. They mourned too long, commemorated too much, and spent absurd resources preserving what markets correctly classified as unrecoverable loss. 3 weeks earlier, the League's Cultural Risk Directorate had circulated a 70-page report with an unambiguous recommendation: monetize human grief assets now, before competing houses entered the sector. The report cataloged memorial walls on Earth and Mars, funeral processions on ocean colonies, anniversary vigils in stations that had never recovered from reactor breaches, and entire orbital corridors where traffic reduced thrust in ritual silence as it passed cenotaph buoys. The final line had drawn laughter in Ben's private counsel. Primitive attachment behaviors indicate pricing inefficiencies and legal ambiguity. Acquisition window favorable. He had approved Phase 1 without amendment. Relic auctions to private collectors. Debt-backed leases on cemetery worlds. Extraction rights for derelict ossuary satellites drifting in outer systems with no active industrial yield. To Krellix accounting software, human memory vaults were non-productive repositories occupying premium orbital positions. To Krellix brokers, they were collateral waiting for confident signatures and compliant enforcers. To Ben, they were proof that humanity had not understood the first principle of survival among older powers. If it cannot fight, liquidate it. The morning session opened with routine tariff disputes until Ben requested emergency floor time under anti-hoarding statutes. He spoke for 11 minutes, voice amplified through the tribunal's translation mesh in a tone halfway between lecture and verdict. For 2 centuries, the Krellix Merchant League has extended lawful credit and secure transit to emergent economies that lack the discipline to manage expansion without insolvency. We have tolerated human volatility because volatility can be priced. What cannot be priced is superstition masquerading as sovereign exception. Earth's remembrance archives, its ossuary satellites, its memorial corridors, its ritualized dead traffic convoys are not sacred infrastructure. They are frozen capital. A species-scale inability to accept inventory loss is not a legal category. Effective immediately, we assert audited salvage claims on all inactive funerary assets within registered trade lanes and demand disclosure access to non-productive human memory repositories. Compliance period: 48 standard hours. The chamber held silence in the way deep water held pressure. Several delegations did not look toward the human tier at all. The avians of Kith folded their wings close against their frames. Alum Scholar shut down her public transcript feed, a quiet signal that law had just yielded to appetite. Ben noticed the discomfort and misread it as fear of market turbulence. which pleased him. He added, without raising his volume, "Sentimental obstruction will be interpreted as breach conduct. Breach conduct carries lien enforcement." When Elena Morrison requested reply time, he granted it with performative magnanimity and sat, claws folded over the rail. She did not touch the hollow podium. She stood with both hands visible, posture calm, dark uniform unadorned except for the narrow silver bar marking full diplomatic authority under human charter law. Her voice arrived without theatrical strain, and that steadiness unsettled more listeners than outrage would have. Let the record show that the Human Systems Compact rejects every salvage claim presented by the Krelix Merchant League against human dead, human memorial sites, human data urn vaults, and all protected remembrance convoys. Let the record also show this warning. Any seizure, desecration, auction, collateralization, or extraction involving the human dead will be treated as sovereign assault under wartime doctrine. For 2 centuries, we have traded in good faith and tolerated insult. We hoped you would choose law over hunger. Choose carefully now. Ben laughed once, short and dry, and keyed his mic live before the presiding arbiter could intervene. "Ambassador Morrison, your address was elegantly delivered and entirely non-binding. Folklore is not statute. The League does not negotiate with grief theater. 48-hour stand." Across the chamber, 2 neutral recorders exchanged private channel pings, timestamping the moment procedural diplomacy had failed. In the public feed, commodity futures spiked across 3 sectors as speculators bet on human capitulation or human retaliation. Ben saw only the first possibility. He exited under armed honor guard while market notices auto-published from League servers. Advance bids open for verified human funerary artifacts, chain of custody guaranteed by Krelix Revenue Fleet Protection. By second shift on Varda Prime, those notices had been translated into 26 trade languages. By third shift, Human Fleet Command transmitted exactly 1 line to all registered League frequencies: "Release the dead and withdraw." The line reached Admiral Sarah Hayes on the command deck of the HNS Quiet Resolve as her task group cleared lunar shadow above Ceres anchorage. Hayes was 52, gray at the temples, precise in speech, famous for winning 2 border wars without giving journalists a sentence worth embellishing. She read the transmission twice, then asked her operations chief for civilian lane overlays around Kestrel Reach and the Ossuary Gate hyperlane. Her tone stayed level, but every officer on deck straightened as if a silent alarm had sounded. On human ships it had. Around her, the bridge looked austere compared to Krelix command theaters. No ceremonial banners, no victory murals, no patron sigils. Matte surfaces, disciplined lighting, hard interfaces designed for the tired hands in long campaigns. The tactical wall painted a crowded web of convoy tracks, insurance tenders, pilgrimage routes, and contractual choke points where Krelix enforcement frigates liked to park under legal pretext. Hayes watched the map and remembered names, not cargo values. Her younger brother's transport had vanished on a relief run during the Scython Plague years. His name was etched in an archive ring, now targeted for seizure under Ben's new claims. She had never discussed that at work. She did not need to. "Flag all remembrance convoy designations," she said. "I want escort options that preserve civilian profile until activation threshold. No public mobilization orders yet. We stay inside law until law is attacked in motion." Commander James Cooper, Intelligence Director for the task group, nodded from the adjacent station. He had spent 9 years building pattern libraries on Krelix contract warfare, how they weaponized debt notices, salvage clauses, and arbitration delay to capture assets without declaring war. "They believe we will file appeals," he said. "They built their timetable around tribunal congestion and ensure caution," Hayes answered. Then their timetable is their vulnerability. On Earth, Elena Morrison returned from Varda Prime to the old diplomatic quarter overlooking the Atlantic floodwalls, where the Ministry of External Security maintained an office with no external insignia and too many redundant comm lines for a purely diplomatic building. Defense Minister David Mitchell met her there before dawn. He carried a folder instead of a tablet, a habit inherited from mentors who distrusted systems connected to anything beyond a room's walls. He had already seen Ben's ultimatum and the market notices. What he wanted was her reading of the chamber. He was not posturing for leverage, Morrison said. He believes our mourning law is performative and our response set is financial. He expects arbitration, sanctions, and probably one escorted media convoy for domestic reassurance. Mitchell stood at the window as rain moved in horizontal sheets across the harbor. And what did the room expect? They expected him to win quickly or overreach catastrophically. No one expects us to do what we prepared to do. A long pause followed. In that office, silence was rarely uncertainty. It was sequencing. Mitchell opened the folder. Inside were authorization drafts for sanctity protocol activation, convoy defense compacts with allied observers, and contingency directives keyed to locations that had not appeared on public military briefs in 40 years. If they touch a single casket, he said, we proceed. Morrison met his gaze. If they touch a single casket, they have already chosen. 3 days after the tribunal session, civilian dock workers on Luna watched 6 mourning vessels depart in standard procession geometry, black hulls carrying preserved remains from 3 colony massacres that history classes still taught by date and casualty count. Families observed the launch from behind shield glass. Priests, secular wardens, and naval honor guards stood in the same line, a quiet arrangement common in human remembrance law and baffling to most external analysts. Krelix brokers tagged the convoy as ideal collateral exposure and deployed revenue protection frigates to Kestrel Reach before the ships crossed midpoint markers. In the shadowed operations gallery beneath Luna traffic control, Cooper briefed a mixed team of fleet officers and civilian archivists. The archivists wore no uniforms, yet every admiral in the room deferred when they spoke about route precedence and memorial chain integrity. They managed the Remembrance Net, a distributed architecture built over centuries from registry fragments, family records, rescue transponders, battlefield logs, and sworn witness statements. To outsiders, it looked ceremonial. To human command, it was continuity itself, a map of obligation impossible to bribe and difficult to blind. Krelix doctrine assumes loss becomes negotiable after 72 hours, Cooper said, bringing up a lattice of intercept predictions around Kestrel Reach. Our doctrine assumes the opposite. Loss becomes jurisdiction. If they board, this is no longer commerce. This is assault. Hayes joined by secure uplink from Quiet Resolve, her image steady despite the delay. All commands are to maintain restraint until threshold crossing. Once crossed, we execute sanctity protocol in full. Record this clearly for tribunal replay. We are not escalating. We are responding. No one in the gallery applauded. No one needed rhetoric. They understood what made humanity formidable was not rage, though rage existed, and not technology alone, though technology would matter. It was memory organized into institutions, law fused to logistics, grief converted into doctrine, and then rehearsed until every station officer and convoy medic could execute it under fire. Krelix accountants had mistaken that structure for sentiment because they had never built anything they would defend at any cost. At Kestrel Reach, the first Krelix frigate locked boarding clamps onto a human remembrance ship and transmitted seizure paperwork with confident legal seals. In response, Every human channel in the sector went silent except one narrowband transmission, time-stamped by Fleet Command and repeated across civilian frequencies so no species could claim confusion later. Release the dead and withdraw. The Krellick seizure packet arrived with 7 notarized attachments, a bond demand, and a cheerful auction pre-listing that valued human remains by rarity tier. On the Remembrance ship Lantern Vale, Convoy Warden Priya Nadim read every line in silence, then opened a direct voice channel instead of replying through text. This convoy is protected under Human Charter Sanctity Protocol and Tribunal Registry 714, she said, each word clear enough for legal replay. You are currently attached to vessels carrying identified civilian dead from sanctioned massacre sites. Release your clamps, power down boarding tubes, and withdraw beyond memorial corridor limits. This is your final lawful notice before hostile designation. The Krellick's boarding lead did not even hide his boredom. Warden, your cargo is non-productive mass-occupying insured volume. We have lien authority under anti-hoarding doctrine and emergency salvage code. Please refrain from ritual language, open your holds, and present chain keys. Nadim did not raise her voice. You have heard the warning. Around her, Lantern Vale's crew remained at stations with the controlled stillness of people who had trained for this exact sentence. The convoy had 6 ships, all civilian-flagged, all dark-hulled, all carrying caskets, data urns, and witness archives from worlds where Memorial Day still stopped entire city grids for 1 minute of silence. No one moved toward weapons. No one needed to. Every sensor stream and word exchange routed automatically into the Remembrance Net and outward to Fleet Command, external security, and the Tribunal's neutral recorder buffer. On Varda Prime, High Commander Ben watched the feed from a private arbitration lounge overlooking the Stormband, one claw tapping a crystal rail in patient rhythm. The lounge served creditors who preferred to experience crises from upholstered distance. 3 league directors stood behind him, running valuation models in parallel windows and debating whether to classify the convoy as strategic collateral or collectible inventory. Ben chose strategic collateral. Collectibles invited sentiment premiums. Collateral taught obedience. Open market notice has traction, one director reported. Advance bids from 14 systems. Human response remains performative. Ben gave a brief nod. Increase the confidence spread and publish boarding confirmation once hold access begins. The chamber will calm when numbers stabilize. A staff legalist hesitated before speaking. Ambassador Morrison's warning referenced wartime doctrine with sovereign assault language. If human command invokes that framework, we may face multilateral scrutiny. Ben did not look away from the feed. They invoke frameworks because they lack force options they can tolerate politically. Humans are excellent at theater and long in records. They do not burn profit channels over relics. Begin the hold inspection. At Kestrel Reach, the first boarding tube irised open with a mechanical sigh that echoed down Lantern Vale's forward lock. 4 Krellick's officers crossed in hardshell suits marked revenue security, rifles magnetized to chest plates for appearances more than necessity. Nadim met them at the threshold with 2 unarmed stewards and a legal drone projecting treaty text at shoulder height. The senior Krellick's officer scanned the drone, dismissed it with a flick, and kept walking. Archive this as cooperative transfer. This is non-consensual seizure, Nadim answered. Your bodycam records are active. You are entering protected memorial space. He turned his head just enough to show one polished eye ridge. Protected by whom? By us. He kept walking. In the operations gallery beneath Luna traffic control, Cooper listened to the exchange through a clean audio channel and watched red markers bloom across Kestrel Reach as additional Krellick's frigates slid into revenue protection formation. Their geometry was textbook league doctrine, overlapping interdiction fields, escrow relay buoys at the center, and enough legal telemetry to bury any protest in procedural sediment for years. Human analysts had modeled it often. Seeing it live changed nothing and sharpened everything. Threshold criteria, Cooper said. Archivist lead Mara Ilian spoke without checking notes. Boarding complete. Hold breach imminent. They have ignored 2 direct warnings and 1 sovereign notice. Hayes appeared again by secure uplink, her face cut by bridge-light shadow. Confirm whether any casket seals are physically disturbed. We need unambiguous crossing. No one answered for 3 long seconds. Then, Nadim's voice came through, lower than before and far more dangerous for the restraint in it. Krellick's officer has ordered sample extraction from casket row B and data urn compartment 3. Seal lock 1 is being cut now. Hayes did not move. Record preserved? On 6 independent streams, Cooper said. Then we are done asking. She keyed fleet-wide command authority, and her next transmission went to every human military node, every sanctity escort, and every allied observer registered for convoy oversight. Sanctity protocol is now active. This is lawful defensive action under wartime doctrine. Priority 1 is recovery of the dead intact. Priority 2 is neutralization of seizure capability. Priority 3 is capture of command evidence. We engage with maximum precision and minimum unnecessary loss. Execute. In the quiet that followed, no one cheered. The room simply moved. At the same moment, Ben received the protocol activation notice and read it twice because disbelief liked repetition. He expected missile alerts, loud declarations, perhaps a symbolic destroyer cresting the lane to posture for negotiations. Instead, human channels flattened into disciplined silence, and the convoy tracks began to drift in ways his tactical software flagged as clerical error. They are spoofing, said one director. No, Ben replied, narrowing his gaze as in 6 civilian icons separated by fractions, then by vectors, then by legal lane layers that should not have permitted movement under current mass signatures. They are rerouting. Kestrel Reach filled with false certainty and then lost it. Krellick's frigates fired anchor beams to lock the convoy, but each beam found an old position by the time it stabilized. Lantern Vale and her sister ships moved like a school crossing black water, not fast, not panicked, as simply exact. Their transponders still broadcast civilian identifiers, funeral permissions, and passenger manifest hashes. Their flight behavior belonged to warcraft. Aboard Krellick's frigate Ledger Spear, Commander Terex felt annoyance before fear, which was typical for officers raised inside systems where contracts mattered more than casualties. He ordered wider interdiction, then tighter. He demanded escrow relays prioritize tactical synchronization over market feeds. The relays acknowledged and then slowed, as if thick liquid had entered the machinery. "Who touched my relays?" he hissed. No one answered quickly enough. His operations chief finally swallowed and said, "Unknown code, bloom across escrow chain. It propagated through notarization ports. It is not attacking drives or weapons. It is freezing transaction consensus." Terex stared. "That is impossible." "Not impossible, Commander. Already active." Across the formation, Krellick's contract warfare depended on real-time trust between ships, brokers, insurers, and command houses. Every firing solution, every boarding risk, every surrender calculation rode the same synchronized ledger architecture that made League fleets efficient and terrifying to smaller powers. Human interdiction arrays concealed behind ceremonial hull plating and dismissed for years as ornamental heat fins did not melt that architecture. They turned it to stone. Weapon locks lagged by seconds. Friendfo updates arrived out of order. Boarding authorizations duplicated and canceled simultaneously. Half the fleet waited for confirmations that no longer existed, while the other half acted on stale permissions. The result was not cinematic chaos. It was bureaucratic paralysis in a kill zone. On Lantern Vale, Nadim watched the Krelix officers inside her lock receive contradictory recall orders, each stamped with valid League authority. They argued over precedence, while her stewards stepped back and sealed the inner memorial quarters. She opened a channel to all convoy ships. Hold integrity remains green. No seal losses beyond attempted cut on row B. Prepare for transfer teams. Her first officer looked at her, eyes bright with contained anger. Do we arm? Not yet, Nadim said. Fleet said precision. We give them precision. By the 6th minute, the Kestrel Reach battle space no longer resembled a seizure operation. It resembled an audit conducted at railgun range. Human ghost signatures appeared at the edge of local sensor quality and resolved into cutters with mourning black hull bands stripped away to reveal military hardpoints beneath. They did not broadcast threats. They transmitted docking vectors to convoy ships, surgical jamming pulses to Krelix fire control loops, and one repeated legal notice in 12 languages. You are interfering with protected remains. Disengage and stand down. Terex laughed when he heard it, a short bark meant for his bridge crew and mostly for himself. They brought legal text to a firefight. Then a human precision lance stitched across Ledger Spear's dorsal spine, shearing 3 weapon mounts cleanly off their gimbals without touching life support, engines, or habitation rings. The bridge shook. Alarms flashed amber, and Terex discovered that being spared could feel more humiliating than being hit to kill. His tactical screen filled with similar strikes on adjacent frigates. Human fire removed teeth, not throats. Krelix ships could still breathe, still turn, still surrender. They simply could not enforce anything. On quiet resolve, Hayes watched the lane unfold in layered rings exactly as simulations promised, and reality always complicated. Ring 1. Cyber interdiction through escrow chain and targeting markets. Ring 2. Precision disarmament against seizure platforms. Ring 3. Boarding recovery teams inbound to secure caskets and data urns before any desperate order could make them bargaining chips. She signed each transition with clipped confirmations, then opened a line to Minister Mitchell and Ambassador Morrison, both listening from Earth. Initial contact is underway, she reported. Krelix command cohesion degrading. Convoy integrity mostly intact. We are moving to extraction. Morrison asked the only question that mattered. The dead? Not in their hands for long, Hayes said. At Kestrel Reach, human breaching teams crossed the gap in matte gray pods that looked almost delicate until they clamped onto Krelix hulls and opened with practiced speed. Their objective was not slaughter, it was control. Secure command decks, isolate self-destruct systems, preserve evidence streams, and get the remains back under sanctity chain before any broker could claim confusion in court. They moved like professionals who had rehearsed this while others were still drafting bids. Ben's private lounge no longer felt insulated. Data flooded his displays from frightened captains demanding priority arbitration and from directors accusing one another of sabotage. His legalist tried again, voice thin now. Hi, Commander. We should issue immediate compliance and request mediated withdrawal. Ben's crest blades trembled once, then steadied. Pride and calculation fought openly across his face. If we withdraw now, we concede doctrine across every lane we hold. They will turn one memorial dispute into universal precedent. The director beside him whispered, They already have. For the first time that day, Ben looked down at the storm beneath the glass vault and seemed to understand that he had mistaken weather for scenery. He keyed command override to all revenue protection groups at Kestrel Reach. Maintain seizure posture. Reinforcement carriers are en route from Ossuary Gate. Hold your positions until they arrive. At Luna, Cooper caught the transmission and felt the room's temperature drop, though the climate controls had not changed. Ben had doubled down in public channels. That mattered more than ships. It meant the League would commit heavier assets rather than negotiate from embarrassment, and heavier assets meant a broader legal theater, more evidence, more risk, and fewer exits for anyone who had signed the order. He turned to Hayes on uplink. He is reinforcing from Ossuary Gate. He is choosing escalation while his line is already breaking. Hayes answered without hesitation. Then we transition from recovery action to campaign framework. Notify all task groups. Kestrel Reach is Phase 1. We proceed by Sanctity Doctrine. Full scope. In the gallery, Mara Ilian closed her archive slate and set it beside the live tactical feed. Old grief and new war sharing one tabletop as if they'd always belonged there. Decision logged, she said quietly. The names are with us. Outside, 6 remembrance ships slipped free of the seizure screen under human escort, carrying their dead onward through a lane now crowded with disabled Krellix frigates, shattered legal fictions, and the first unmistakable proof that humanity had stopped asking. Admiral Hayes did not watch the disabled Krellix frigates for long. She watched the route those reinforcements would have to take, a narrow braid of legal lanes and old memorial exclusions stretching from Ossuary Gate toward Kestrel Reach, and she asked for one thing that made 3 bridge officers look up in surprise. "Bring me archive depth," she said. Commander Cooper turned from his station, brows tightening. "Full archive release?" "Layered release," Hayes answered. "Not to command, to the lane." On a human warship, that distinction carried weight. Most admirals asked for munitions, squadrons, reserve fuel, casualty channels. Hayes had just asked for memory geometry, a classified subset of the remembrance net that most foreign analysts believed was ceremonial metadata preserved for historical dignity. The operations chief entered her authorization code, then a second one from archivist lead Mara Ilian on Luna, and the tactical wall changed from clean vectors to a dense constellation of tiny light points that seemed at first like noise. They were not noise. They were records. Each point marked a verified event attached to that region of transit space. Missing relief craft, broken ceasefire convoys, piracy rescues, emergency burials after hull ruptures, vanished survey teams and sworn testimonies that had survived regime collapse and data corruption by being copied family to family, station to station, until institutional archive teams rebuilt full chains of identity. The pattern ran deep enough to map behavioral signatures and deep enough to predict how Krellix command houses would move when scared, proud, or both. Cooper read the field in silence, then exhaled through his teeth. They never realized we indexed them inside our grief records. Hayes kept her eyes on the projected corridor. They taught us their habits by attacking everyone. We just refused to forget. At Kestrel Reach, the first visible symptom appeared as a brief shimmer across local navigation bands. Krellix reinforcement carriers translating from Ossuary Gate emerged exactly where their doctrine expected clear lanes, only to find navigational arbitration packets already populated with human memorial precedence claims carrying neutral observer signatures from the scholars of Lum, the avians of Kith, and 2 creditor blocks that hated human politics but trusted human record-keeping. Every packet cited verifiable incidents with time-stamped witnesses and tribunal-compatible chain integrity. No jamming, no forgery, just law arriving faster than Krellix software could contest. On Carrier Prophet's mandate, Captain Velcor slammed a claw against his command rail as lane control indicators flashed yellow. Who filed these claims? We had corridor priority. His legal officer spoke with the brittle cadence of someone trying not to panic in front of subordinates. Claims were pre-validated years ago under dormant memorial statutes. Dormant does not mean expired. Human Council just activated route precedents in sequence. If we violate now, neutral insurers can void our war risk coverage and freeze procurement in 9 systems. Velcor rounded on him. We are military escort. Coverage is irrelevant. With respect, Captain, our munitions contracts are escrow-gated. Coverage is ammunition. The bridge fell quiet for half a breath while that landed. Then it got worse. As the carriers attempted manual override, memorial beacons along the corridor ignited one after another, old buoys that had drifted unnoticed for decades, suddenly waking unsynchronized clocks. To Krellic sensors, they looked like harmless comm relays, running ceremonial light cycles. To human tactical algorithms, they were hardened position references, giving human ships perfect navigation through interference and giving neutral recorders a public, redundant timeline of every Krellic's maneuver. The beacons did not fire weapons. They erased ambiguity. Contact Bloom, port quarter, Velcor's tactical chief called. Civilian profile hulls resolving to armed cutters. They are inside our blind cone. How? No one on the bridge answered that question honestly, because the honest answer was humiliating. The cone had only been blind if one ignored a network built by people who treated remembrance as logistics. 27 minutes after Ben's reinforcement order, the tide shifted in measurable terms. Krellic's carriers still had mass advantage, and human forces still held strict fire discipline. But the initiative moved. Human cutters flowed through beacon-marked vectors with impossible-seeming precision, placing interdiction pulses exactly where Krellic's contract relays attempted to reknit. Every time League Command repaired one segment of consensus, another segment froze under legal authenticated packet storms, carrying incident evidence older than some Krellic's houses. The war was being fought with rails, code, and affidavits at once. Hayes opened a system-wide channel, this time not just to Krellic's combatants, but to neutral listeners and tribunal buffers. Attention Krellic's reinforcement groups entering the Kestrel corridor. You are now operating inside active memorial precedence lanes with observer certification. Any interference with protected remains or designated remembrance infrastructure constitutes deliberate sovereign assault and evidentiary self-incrimination. Disarmament strikes will continue until you withdraw beyond exclusion markers. Medical channels remain open. Surrender protocols are attached in 12 languages. Her voice was calm, almost administrative. The effect was not. On Prophet's mandate, Velcor heard the attached surrender protocol arrive with checksum purity and felt a cold pressure spread behind his eyes. Humans had not improvised this. They had drafted it, translated it, and rehearsed distribution timing long before Ben mocked them in the tribunal. That implied planning horizons measured in years, maybe generations, in a strategic culture that treated memory as an operational reserve. He keyed a private line to High Commander Ben's command circuit and waited through 2 failed handshakes while escrow paralysis rippled through League comm architecture. When the channel finally opened, Ben's face appeared in sharp profile, lounge background gone, command deck lights hard across his crest blades. Report, Ben said. Route control contested by archival claims and beacon synchronization, Velcor answered. Human light units are maneuvering inside our prediction model. Consensus lag is degrading our firing chains. Request permission to suspend seizure posture and regroup at outer marker. Ben's eyes narrowed. Denied. You hold lane integrity in advance. High Commander, with respect, lane integrity no longer exists in doctrinal form. They have transformed legal topology into tactical terrain. Ben leaned closer to his pickup, voice dropping into a tone he used for subordinates he suspected of weakness. Captain, you command a heavy carrier group against repurposed funeral escorts and courtroom theatrics. Restore discipline. Advance. Velcor felt anger rise, then flatten into fear that looked, from the outside, like obedience. Understood, he said, because there were still cameras on his bridge and because the Krellick system had trained officers to survive humiliation by passing it down chain. When the line closed, his legal officer spoke before permission was granted. If we press through those precedence lanes and strike recorded memorial nodes, we trigger automatic tribunal seizure of League civilian reserves. Velcor gave a short, humorless sound. If we refuse, Ben courts-martials us for dereliction. The legal officer met his gaze. Then we are choosing which ruin arrives first. Across the battle space, human boarders completed recovery actions on 2 seized frigates and transferred intact casket inventories back to Lantern Vale and her sister ships under continuous verification from archivists on Luna. Nadim walked the corridor beside Casket Row B as medics resealed the cut lock and data clerks revalidated chain signatures, each motion methodical, reverent, and fast. Her first officer paused by the repaired seal, gloved hand hovering over metal scored by Krellick's tools. They treated this like cargo. Nadim checked the fresh signature stamp and answered without looking up. Cargo does not generate fleet doctrine. She keyed an outbound update. Convoy integrity restored to 98.7. No loss of remains. Attempted extraction failed. We are prepared to continue route when escorted. Hayes acknowledged immediately. Escort is inbound. Hold under beacon shadow until Ring 2 clears. On Luna, Mara Ilyin listened to the exchange, then turned to a bank of civilian analysts and spoke with the quiet authority that had once run evacuation records during plague years. Push archive depth phase 2 to all task groups. Include betrayal index overlays. A young lieutenant blinked. Phase 2 includes non-human incident memory. Correct, Ilyin said. They preyed on half this quadrant. We are done letting each victim think they were alone. That release became the second surprise, and this one struck morale rather than machinery. Within minutes, Allied observers and neutral insurers received tightly packaged, legally verified dossiers linking Krellick's enforcement houses to centuries of grave theft, coerced debt funerary auctions, and fabricated salvage rulings against smaller species too poor to litigate. The packets carried witness statements from worlds Ben assumed had forgotten or died. Instead, those worlds responded in public channels, with confirmation tags, then with declarations suspending Krellick's credit recognition pending investigation. League strength had always rested on synchronized belief that their contracts were inevitable. As that belief cracked, so did the social glue behind their fleets. Ben saw the cascade happen in real time. Notifications stacked across his command wall. Insurer holds, observer condemnations, creditor inquiries phrased as neutral questions and timed like knives. A director from House Vem transmitted a private demand for immediate de-escalation and asset fire breaks. Another director accused Ben of triggering systemic liquidity collapse through pride. His legalist, pale around the mandible ridges, said what no one in the room wanted, said aloud. High Commander, if member houses begin unilateral distancing, the League ceases to function as a single command economy before this battle ends. Ben rounded on him. Then keep them in line. With what leverage, sir? Their leverage is leaving. For the first time since Varda Prime, Ben looked old rather than merely severe. He had built a career on confidence shocks delivered to weaker species, on making resistance appear more expensive than compliance. Now humans were applying the same principle with patient, documented cruelty toward the one thing he could not lose and still rule: trust between merchants. He dismissed the staff and stood alone at the command rail for several breaths, listening to distant damage alarms and clipped status reports from ships that still called him commander out of habit. Through the forward display, he could see Kestrel's memorial beacons burning in ordered lines, tiny lights in black space, each one a point where someone had died and someone else had refused to erase them. He understood, with a clarity that felt like vertigo, that humanity's mourning system was not an emotional indulgence attached to governance. It was governance extended across time. A secure channel chimed, encrypted at the highest league tier. Prime Executor Chow of the inner board appeared, scales mottled with stress color. "Ben, speak plainly," Chow said. "Can you restore control at Kestrel?" Ben hesitated half a second too long. "Yes, if carriers hold formation and we bring heavy mass from Ossuary Gate." Chow studied him. "Our houses are fracturing. The tribunal is requesting emergency review. If you cannot produce decisive stabilization soon, we will authorize local commanders to prioritize asset preservation over your doctrine." Asset preservation. Polite language for abandoning him if necessary. Ben straightened and summoned the old iron into his voice. "If we retreat now, humans set binding memorial law over all trade lanes. Every debtor species learns they can weaponize sentiment and call it sovereignty. We end this here, hard, before imitation spreads." Chow's eyes narrowed. "You still think this is sentiment?" The channel closed before Ben could answer. On Prophet's mandate, Velcor received new orders stamped directly from Ben's command key. Consolidate surviving carriers and revenue frigates at Ossuary Gate Inner Marker. Establish a fortified line behind seized evidence barges transferred from secondary depots, and prepare for decisive confrontation. The phrasing avoided the word hostage, but every officer on his bridge understood the tactical intent. Ben wanted shields made of what humans would not abandon. Velcor read the order twice, then sent compliance confirmation because refusal would end his career and perhaps his life. Yet as his formation turned toward Ossuary Gate, he watched human cutters shadow the maneuver at careful distance, neither striking the retreating engines nor hurrying the withdrawal, simply recording, positioning, allowing the League to reveal its next shape. His tactical chief broke the silence. "Are they letting us go?" Velcor kept his gaze forward. "No, they are letting us choose where we fall." Behind him, damaged Krellick ships limped into regroup vectors under sputtering consensus links, while ahead, the gate's gravity bloom waited like a narrowed throat. The League was not beaten yet. Not in firepower, not in mass. But its certainty was gone, and without certainty, every command sounded like an argument. At Kestrel Reach, Hayes watched the regroup stream and gave her own orders with the steadiness of someone moving pieces on a board she had studied for years. "All task groups maintain pressure and preserve evidence. Do not overextend into gate kill zones until ring analysis completes. Recovery ships continue on protected track. We finish what we started." Nadim, escorting the restored convoy into beacon shadow, heard that transmission and touched the memorial rail once with 2 fingers, a gesture so brief cameras almost missed it. Then, Lantern Veil advanced with lights dimmed in respect and engines bright with purpose, while behind her, the species that had called grief weakness tried to build one last line out of things humans would cross any distance to reclaim. The species that had called grief weakness tried to build one last line out of things humans would cross any distance to reclaim. And Admiral Hayes answered by opening a channel she had not used in any prior operation. "Activate custodian authority," she said. Commander Cooper looked up sharply. "Confirmed legal basis?" "Confirmed by Tribunal Charter Annex and Memorial Corridor Maintenance Accords," Hayes replied. "We serviced the gate when the League treated it as a toll machine. We kept the dead lanes stable. We still hold the maintenance keys. On the tactical wall, Ossuary Gate shifted from a simple transit bloom into a layered machine of vectors, safety apertures, and emergency arrest corridors that only lane custodians ever studied in depth. Krellick's doctrine assumed the gate was neutral terrain that could be taxed, patrolled, and bullied. Human doctrine had treated it for a century as a structure where one bad calculation could scatter civilian transports across light minutes of vacuum. That quiet, unglamorous stewardship had accumulated permissions no one respected until the day respect became compulsory. 41 minutes after Lantern Vale entered Beacon Shadow, the first custodian commands propagated through the Ware Gate. Navigation buoys rotated by fractional degrees. Emergency beacons switched from passive mode to active arbitration. Translation windows narrowed, not enough to trap traffic indiscriminately, but enough to force heavy carrier groups into staggered entry channels where synchronized broadsides became harder and evasive options shrank. Human ships loaded with fresh corridor maps from archive depth moved through those constraints as if they had rehearsed on the exact geometry for years. They had. On Prophet's mandate, Captain Velcor watched the new lane map redraw itself and felt dread harden into professional certainty. "This is not jamming," he said almost to himself. "They are reconfiguring the road under our hulls." His tactical chief, voice thin, answered, "Custodian signatures are authenticated by tribunal route. If we override them, every neutral recorder logs deliberate violation of safety law and active memorial traffic." Velcor's mandibles tightened. "If we obey them, we enter piecemeal." "You asked which ruin arrives first," the legal officer said quietly. "This is the answer." Across the regrouping line, similar recognition spread. Krellick ships began to misalign, not through incompetence, but because their preferred formations required temporal precision they no longer controlled. Human cutters exploited every offset, weaving between carriers to place non-lethal lance fire on weapon clusters and escrow antennae. Then came the second surprise. Hulls marked as medical tenders and memorial maintenance craft, long catalogued by League intelligence as non-combatant auxiliaries, unfolded modular bays and released dense clouds of autonomous witness drones. The drones carried no explosives. They carried multi-spectrum recorders, legal timestamp anchors, and direct uplinks to tribunal buffers that could not be quietly erased. Krellick's officers discovered within minutes that every shot, every order, every attempt to reposition seized remains as shields was being captured from 12 angles and mirrored to 42 neutral archives. Command by intimidation had always depended on narrative control after contact. Human forces had just removed narrative control from the battle space. Ben saw the witness swarm bloom around his forward elements and struck his command rail with a force that cracked the surface lacquer. "Destroy those drones." A staff officer hesitated. "They are registry neutral observers under attached legal escorts. Firing on them adds observer assault counts." Ben's voice turned to steel. "Then blind them." "We have tried. They mesh through civilian relay traffic and memorial beacon bandwidth. If we flood all channels, we blind ourselves first." The answer sat in the command pit like a verdict. Ben could still issue orders. He could still mass ships. But each command now moved through lanes humans shaped. Under observation humans had invited, with legal consequences humans had prepared in advance. The League had built empires, by making smaller species choose between losing assets and losing face. Humanity had offered a third option to everyone watching. Keep your dignity, keep records, and stand together, while the bully's certainty collapsed. Hayes watched those collapse vectors stabilize into opportunity and keyed a narrowband call to Lantern Vale, where Warden Nadim remained in escort shadow with recovered caskets secured and chain signatures green. Warden, status. Convoy holds full integrity, Nadim replied. Families have begun live vigil links. They can see the corridor lights. Hayes let that sit for a breath. Keep them online. Not for morale, for witness. The League must understand exactly who they tried to invoice. Nadim answered with a restraint that carried more force than shouting. Understood, Admiral. The names are present. Human resolve at Ossuary Gate did not look like fury. It looked like coordination between people who believed obligation survived death, and therefore survived fear. On quiet resolve, crews rotated in silent efficiency, while memorial officers sat beside targeting teams, verifying that every disarmament strike preserved life support and avoided casket barges. On Luna, civilian archivists checked identity hashes with military cryptographers, one confirming who had been lost, the other ensuring no one could ever falsify that loss again. On Earth, Morrison and Mitchell stood in the same operations room where diplomacy had ended and doctrine had begun, receiving a live stream where every tactical icon carried a human name attached to a ship, a family, or a promise made decades earlier. Mitchell studied the map, then spoke to Morrison without turning. He still believes this is about territory. Morrison's eyes stayed on the convoy feeds. He built his career on prices. He cannot imagine a ledger where debt runs from the living to the dead and is paid in discipline. She requested a channel to fleet-wide command, and Hayes gave it instantly. Morrison's voice moved across the human net and into tribunal mirrors, formal enough for law, cold enough for war. For 2 centuries, the Human Systems Compact has traded under statutes we did not write and endured contempt. We did not answer with force. We accepted unequal tiers, predatory arbitration delays, and the daily fiction that civility belongs to those with larger fleets. We did so because stability mattered more than pride. We hoped the Krelix Merchant League would choose law over hunger when warned clearly and in public. They chose desecration, seizure, and extortion built on our dead. Let the record show this is not vengeance. This is enforcement. Every casket will be recovered. Every data urn will be restored. Every officer who ordered or profited from grave exploitation will stand trial under evidence they cannot erase. To all neutral systems, medical corridors remain open, surrender channels remain open, and the protections we demanded for our dead are now extended to yours. Choose your alignment accordingly. No one applauded on human decks. The speech was not for catharsis. It was a frame. Within minutes, responses arrived from systems that had spent years swallowing League humiliation to keep trade moving. The Scholars of Lum expanded observer certification. The Avians of Kith opened emergency refuel rights for sanctity escorts. 2 creditor blocks that had mocked human ritual filed provisional support for anti-trafficking injunctions, less from moral awakening than from fear of being seen on the wrong side of a documented atrocity economy. In war, motives varied. Effects counted. On Krelix bridges, that accumulating alignment landed like pressure dropping in a sealed chamber. Crews still followed orders, but confidence bled out of each acknowledgement. They were no longer the inevitable center of commerce. They were a coalition target mapped by law, code, and memory. Velcor received a general broadcast from Ben ordering all command-capable ships to close on Ossuary Gate inner marker and form a shield crescent around seized evidence barges transferred from secondary depots. Velcor stared at the objective text, and understood the gamble in full. Ben meant to force human hesitation by stacking sacred cargo in front of military mass, then punch a retreat corridor once human fire discipline tightened. It was ruthless and tactically coherent, and it depended on one old assumption: that humans could be maneuvered into paralysis by their own ethics. Velcor opened his private captain's log, knowing it might become tribunal evidence or his own epitaph. High Commander has elected hostage geometry, he recorded. Human behavior to date suggests they anticipated this branch. His executive officer glanced over. Do we still call them primitives? Velcor watched human cutters take station along custody-approved vectors with machine precision and living patience. Not on my bridge. At the inner marker, Hayes implemented the next layer. Human special operations wings launched from disguised memorial tenders, pods masked by beacon traffic and witness drone clutter until their final approach. Their mission packets were brutal in complexity and narrow in intent. Board the evidence barges, secure every casket and urn intact, sever remote detonation paths, and transmit continuous visual proof of chain integrity. Simultaneously, rail lances from outer rings clipped carrier weapon mounts with centimeter discipline, turning Ben's crescent from a spear into a wall that could absorb, but not strike effectively. The balance of power did not flip in a single dramatic blast. It tilted degree by degree until the tactical math became undeniable. Krelik's heavy ships retained mass, yet each minute their usable firepower declined, while human control of movement, evidence, and allied legitimacy expanded. In modern conflict, victory belonged to the side that defined what actions were possible. Humanity now defined that set. Cooper leaned toward Hayes as new telemetry flooded in. Boarding teams report first 2 barges secure. No SEAL losses. Self-destruct triggers isolated. 3rd barge resisting with internal barricades, mostly security contractors. Rules unchanged, Hayes said. Offer surrender, then incapacitate only what blocks recovery. Keep medical teams behind first wave. He gave a short nod. Understood. From the command pit came another update. Krelik's carrier line attempting retreat burn in sequence. Gate windows denying simultaneous exit. Hayes's expression did not change. That is custodian design. They leave in order or not at all. 3 decks below, wounded Kreliks from disabled frigates were transferred through a human medical corridor under armed supervision. Triage tags in both languages. Some stared at the human medics as if trying to reconcile rumor with reality. They had been told humans were sentimental, volatile, and capable of sustained strategic clarity. What they saw instead were professionals who hit hard, documented harder, and still stabilized enemy casualties while battle alarms sounded overhead. In Ben's flagship command chamber, the tactical wall filled with surrender pings from outer escorts and damage reports from carriers now missing key weapon arcs. His attempt to reassert cohesion through fear met a new obstacle. Captains had begun requesting direct surrender protocol links from human channels rather than routing through League command. Authority was no longer descending cleanly. It was dissolving sideways. A senior aide spoke with measured desperation. High Commander, if we declare conditional withdrawal and release all protected cargo, we may preserve core houses and petition for managed sanctions. Ben turned slowly. Conditional terms are for peers. They are still upstart labor powers with lucky code. The aide did not flinch. Then Lucky Code has captured your fleet architecture, your legal narrative, and your retreat routes. Ben dismissed him with a gesture sharp enough to end careers and keyed a direct channel to Hayes. When her face appeared, calm in gunmetal light, he delivered a declaration meant to recover psychological ground through scale and contempt. Admiral Hayes, You have staged an elaborate spectacle around mortuary superstition and clerical sabotage. Do not mistake temporary disruption for supremacy. The League still commands carriers enough to shatter your escort screens and enough capital to starve your clients for a generation. Withdraw beyond the gate, return seized enforcement assets, and submit this dispute to controlled arbitration. Refuse, and I will classify every human memorial lane as hostile infrastructure and clear it by force. Hayes listened without interruption, then answered in the same measured cadence she used for weather reports and firing solutions. High Commander Ben, this channel is witnessed by the Tribunal and 31 neutral systems. You seized civilian remains after formal warning, attempted commodification of protected dead, and repositioned that cargo as tactical cover. Your command network is penetrated, your heavy line is disarmed in layers, and your retreat windows are under custodian control you ignored for decades. You will release all barges, stand down all armed vessels, and transmit unconditional surrender codes. If you comply now, your crews live and your wounded receive full care. If you refuse, we will remove your command capacity ship by ship until compliance occurs. We have the time. We have the record. Choose carefully now. For 6 seconds, neither side spoke. Around them, the gate burned with beacon light, witness drones, and the controlled violence of a battle already leaning toward one conclusion. Then, Ben cut the channel without reply and ordered full concentration at the inner marker, every surviving carrier pivoting to cover his flagship as if mass alone could reverse momentum. Human task groups responded by tightening into 3 concentric rings, rail lances charging, boarding wings reporting near-complete recovery of the hostage barges, and custodian controls narrowing escape vectors to a single unstable corridor. Ben would have to gamble if he ran. On quiet resolve, Hayes watched the rings lock and said, "Signal all commands. Final confrontation begins at the marker. No drift, no haste, no errors." Across human and allied channels, confirmations returned in steady sequence while the last unsecured barge flashed green and the path to Ben's bridge opened under cold, patient fire. Then, Ossuary Gate became a machine for ending wars. The first ring struck without spectacle. Human cyber teams riding memorial beacon bandwidth injected authenticated noise into every remaining Krellix market relay, not to blind sensors outright, but to make each targeting consensus expire a fraction of a second before execution. Carrier gunners watched clean locks decay into legal conflicts, then into dead prompts waiting for signatures from officers already cut off by compartition. The second ring followed with brutal precision. Rail lances fired in disciplined pairs, each shot shaving weapon mounts, launch collars, and command uplinks from Krellix hulls while leaving pressure holes, medical bays, and life support untouched. The third ring moved through the wreck of Doctrine itself, boarding pods and custodian cutters threading between crippled warships to secure every barge, every casket rack, every data-urn cradle under continuous witness feeds. On the bridge of quiet resolve, Hayes tracked the fight as layered probabilities instead of cinematic chaos. "Report by objective, not by damage," she said, and the command pit answered in clipped cadence. "Barge cluster 1 to 4 secured. Chain integrity verified. Carrier crescent left disarmed, propulsion intact. Witness drones maintain tribunal mirror. No observer losses. Medical corridor open on Vector 9. Krellix wounded accepting transfer." Cooper leaned over the tactical rail, voice low. "Ben is shifting his flagship behind the remaining heavy carriers. He is trying to rebuild a striking wedge." Hayes nodded once. "He is not rebuilding anything. He is buying minutes." At the inner marker, Ben watched his reduced crescent shrink under methodical fire and understood that the humans were not fighting to punish him in the moment. They were fighting to close every future argument. Every strike left his ships alive enough to testify and helpless enough to stop interfering. Every boarding action generated chain of custody logs before the smoke cleared. Even his own captains, trained to treat law as leverage, could see the trap now. There would be no plausible deniability, no missing footage, no lost manifests. There would only be the record. He opened a fleet-wide command channel and forced steadiness into his tone. All Krelix vessels, form on my flagship and prepare synchronized retreat burn through Gate Corridor Delta 7. Revenue doctrine remains in effect. Any captain transmitting surrender codes without command authorization is in permanent breach. The replies came unevenly. Some captains affirmed. Others stayed silent. 2 ships transmitted medical requests instead. A third sent partial surrender headers before cutting its own channel in panic. Ben cut those feeds and turned to his navigation chief. Prime drives to retreat profile. We break through their outer arc and regroup beyond gate gravity. The chief's claws hovered over controls. Delta 7 has narrowed under custodian authority. Window stability is below safe threshold for our tonnage. Safe threshold is irrelevant, Ben snapped. Execute. By minute 19 of the confrontation, the human rings tightened and the Krelix line lost cohesive fire entirely. What remained of League resistance was local, angry, and disjointed. One carrier attempted a blind broadside and blew out its own relay spine when delayed firing commands cascaded out of order. Another tried to ram a boarding cutter and was pinned by non-lethal grav tethers before contact. Human pilots answered every desperate maneuver with the same unnerving restraint, cutting weapons, not crews, caging motion, not lives. Lantern Vale and the other Remembrance ships held position under escort shadow, engines idling low while family vigil feeds remained open. Priya Nadim stood in the forward memorial corridor where resealed caskets sat in ordered rows, each name glowing softly on confirmation panels. When the tactical overlay in her palm turned from amber to green across all recovered barges, she transmitted a single sentence to Fleet Command. All protected remains accounted for and intact. On quiet resolve, Hayes closed her eyes for one breath, then reopened them to war. Proceed to terminal phase, she said. Disable flagship escape options. Cooper pushed the order, and human mine layers that had masked themselves as debris tenders released gravitational shear nodes along Delta 7's already unstable corridor. The mines did not detonate like conventional ordnance. They folded local vectors into brief, hard distortions that made high-mass translation paths collapse into violent drift. Ben's flagship ignited retreat burn exactly as the corridor narrowed and struck the first shear boundary. The vessel lurched, bow slewing 40 degrees off intended axis, port drive screaming as inertial compensators fought to keep decks from becoming walls. Corridor collapse, shouted Ben's navigation chief. We cannot hold line. Then force it, Ben said. A second shear node triggered, and the flagship dropped from controlled burn into a grinding lateral slide that carried it out from behind its protective carriers and into open firing geometry. Human dreadnoughts, previously holding the outer ring like patient predators, advanced in layered arcs until Ben's ship sat inside a perfect sphere of converging solutions. 32 lock icons bloomed across his tactical wall. 32 ships that could end him in a heartbeat and had chosen, so far, not to. Hayes opened direct channel one final time. Hi, Commander Ben, your exit is gone. Your barges are recovered, your fleet is disarmed and surrounded. Transmit unconditional surrender codes now. Ben stared at her image and bared his teeth. You overestimate your leverage. Kill me, and this record fractures into accusation and myth. Hayes's expression did not shift. No. We built redundancy for your vanity. Ben cut the channel and issued his last coherent offensive order. All remaining carriers fire full spread at human Ring 3. If we cannot break through, we take their boarders with us. Half the carriers could not comply because their mounts were gone. The others loosed scattered volleys that human point defense nets intercepted in bright, controlled bursts far from civilian lanes. One missile bank clipped a disabled Krellix frigate instead, stripping plating and venting cargo atmosphere. Human rescue cutters diverted immediately, grapples out, medics queued. On Ben's bridge, the silence that followed was worse than alarm tones. His senior aide stepped forward, voice almost gentle. "Hi, Commander. There is no path left that preserves command. Surrender and protect the crews." Ben looked from the aide to the tactical wall filled with surrender pings spreading like frost through what remained of his fleet. Pride, fear, and calculation crossed his face in sequence and settled on something darker. "Seal command pit," he said. "Initiate vessel scuttle protocol." The aide froze. "Scuttle will kill our wounded decks and erase casualty logs." "Exactly," Ben said. He placed his claw on the self-destruct authorization plate. 2 biometric confirmations were required. He entered the first and turned toward his operations chief for the second. The chief stepped back. "I will not sign this," she said. Ben lunged for manual override instead. The bridge doors blew inward before he reached it. Human Special Operations Marines surged through controlled smoke, shock batons and restraint webs leading, kinetic rounds held in reserve. They moved with that same intolerable precision, dropping armed guards in seconds, isolating command consoles, and slamming a jammer spike into the scuttle core. Ben drew a crest blade and took one step toward the nearest operator before a restraint field locked his arms against his sides and drove him to one knee without breaking bone. "Command deck secure," called the human team leader. "Scuttle path interrupted at primary and tertiary nodes. Evidence core intact." The fighting on the flagship ended in less than 2 minutes. Outside, the wider battle wound down almost at once as surviving Krellix captains saw Ben's command signal vanish and human surrender channels remain open. One by one, then in clusters, Krellix ships powered down weapons and transmitted compliance codes into the tribunal mirror. Admiral Sarah Hayes crossed onto Ben's bridge under guard, while damage lights pulsed amber across blackened consoles. She removed her helmet, accepted a small evidence pouch from a Marine, and stepped to Ben's command table. Inside the pouch lay a recovered human memorial token, dented but intact, taken from the seized barge manifests where it had been listed as auctionable novelty. She set it on the table between them. "You will stand trial before the names you tried to sell," she said. Ben, pinned in a restraint field, stared at the token as if it were a language he had refused to learn. Around him, his surviving officers stood under guard, breathing hard, some bleeding lightly from concussive impacts, all alive. The tactical wall behind Hayes shifted from combat plots to surrender registries as code after code came in. Krellix frigates, carriers, revenue cutters, depot escorts, entire command houses reduced to one repeated status: disarmed, compliant, boarded. Hayes inclined her head toward the live recorder drone, hovering at shoulder height. "State your status for the tribunal record." Ben's chest rose and fell, once, twice. His crest blades, ceremonial symbols of command, still hung at his belt. Slowly, with visible effort, he disengaged them and let them clatter onto the deck. "I surrender unconditionally to Human Fleet Command," he said. The bridge remained silent, except for recorder chimes capturing the words in 12 legal formats. Hayes held his gaze. "Confirm with biometric oath." A Marine lowered a portable oath scanner to Ben's restrained hand. He pressed his palm to the plate. Identity strands resolved, command authority verified, surrender clause bound. The scanner flashed green and transmitted instantly to the Galactic Exchange Tribunal. Neutral insurers, allied observers, and every Krellix vessel still pretending the outcome might be negotiable. On 36 bridges across the battlespace, final resistance ended as that biometric oath arrived with incontrovertible command signature. Automated League protocols designed for orderly asset transfer in mergers and hostile takeovers executed their own epitaph. Command hierarchy dissolved. Emergency stewardship passed to tribunal receivers. Warship control tables locked to surrender mode. Cooper's voice reached Hayes over secure channel from Quiet Resolve. Fleet-wide confirmation. Krellix chain of command has formally dissolved on screen. Combat capacity is shattered. No organized hostile formations remain. Hayes looked once more at Ben, then to his wounded operations chief, then to the medical teams already entering the bridge with bilingual triage slates. Begin casualty stabilization for all personnel, she ordered. Human and Krellix preserve every record stream. This battle is finished. Outside the flagship viewport, Ossuary Gate burned with beacon light and drifting hulks, but the firing had stopped. Human dreadnoughts held position in silent arcs around surrendering ships, while recovery craft escorted the restored barges toward protected lanes. In the memorial corridors of Lantern Vale, families watched confirmation icons turn steady green beside names they had feared would be lost again. And for the first time since Kestrel Reach, no one was asking for the dead to be released because they were already coming home. The quiet after the firing stopped had its own machinery. On Ben's flagship, restraint fields hummed. Medics called triage numbers in 2 languages, and witness drones floated above it all like impartial moons, recording who was treated first and who gave which order. Admiral Hayes stayed on the command deck until the last scuttle circuit was physically removed and sealed in an evidence canister, then signed custody transfer with the same pen she had used for battle authorizations. Priority remains unchanged, she told the joint medical team. Wounded by condition, not by uniform. Anyone who interferes answers to me. A Krellix surgeon, scales ash pale with exhaustion, stared at her for a second and then gave a tight bow. Understood, Admiral. We have 32 critical, 14 of them from your disabling strikes and 18 from internal cascade failures. Then we keep 32 alive, Hayes said. In the adjacent bay, Commander Velcor sat with a pressure brace on one arm while a human corpsman checked his pupils. His legal officer stood nearby, clutching a data crystal like a lifeline. When Cooper entered with security detail, both Krellix officers stiffened, expecting separation and shackles. Cooper held out a portable recorder instead. Captain Velcor, your private log was mirrored when your ship surrendered, he said. You flagged hostage geometry and objected to illegal use of remains. If you confirm that statement on record, your crew's status moves from complicit command to cooperating witness. Velcor looked at the recorder, then at the medics working on his gunnery chief 2 beds down. You are offering terms while we are defeated. We are offering law while you are alive, Cooper replied. Those are not the same thing. Velcor gave his statement in full. His legal officer followed, then added the command hash for Ben's intermarker order. Cooper accepted both files, sealed them, and tagged their chain of custody to the tribunal stream. Physical evidence did not vanish into rumor. It moved, logged, signed, and watched. 3 hours later on Lantern Vale, Priya and Nadim supervised the final verification sweep. Every casket seal from row B was rechecked by hand and by scanner. Every data urn cradle was matched against pre-seizure hash lists. The dented memorial token Hayes had placed on Ben's command table was returned in a small transparent container, now carrying 6 signatures: Marine Recovery, Bridge Evidence Officer, Fleet Legal, Convoy Warden, Family Representative, Archivist. Nadim held it in both hands for a long moment before passing it to the waiting grandson of the original bearer, connected by live hollow from Mars. "It comes home intact," she said. The man on hollow swallowed once and nodded. "Thank you for not letting them turn him into a line item." By the 4th day after Ossuary Gate, the Galactic Exchange Tribunal reconvened in emergency full chamber. The same storm band rolled under the glass vault, violent and indifferent. This time, the human delegation stood at principal tier by unanimous procedural motion, with no debate. Ben appeared in a transparent restraint enclosure, unarmored, crest blades absent, flanked by neutral marshals. Prime Executor Chow testified first, voice stripped of ceremonial confidence. "The League chain of command dissolved on authenticated surrender," Chow said. "House Emergency Councils accept tribunal receivership. We contest specific penalties, not the facts." Morrison stood when called and did not raise her voice. "Facts are sufficient. We will not request collective punishment. We request targeted accountability, full restitution, and binding law that protects all species, not only ours." Grave exploitation was the weapon this time, because we were the target this time. Next time, absent reform, it would be someone smaller and easier to erase. We will not permit that cycle to continue. The presiding arbiter turned to Hayes. "Admiral, did Human Fleet Command conduct retaliatory venting, execution, or famine coercion after surrender?" "No," Hayes answered. "Captured ships were stabilized. Crews received medical treatment. Krellick's dead were transferred with full funerary protections under sanctity protocol, the same protections the League denied us." A murmur moved through the chamber. Not surprise, but recognition settling into place. Ben was asked for statement. He stared at the floor for several seconds, then at the recorder grid. "I classified memory as non-productive mass. I was wrong about what sustained their power, and wrong about what law could endure under pressure." He stopped there. Whatever else he might have said stayed behind his teeth and never emerged again. Sentence came at the end of the session. Life imprisonment in a transparent war crimes facility on Thel Station. Annual mandatory attendance at restitution ceremonies for affected worlds. No eligibility for command influence. No private arbitration privileges. Full asset seizure for compensation funds. The order was signed in open session and mirrored across 48 jurisdictions before Ben was escorted out. In the corridor outside, the Krellick's operations chief, who had refused Ben's scuttle confirmation, stood with tribunal counsel. She caught Hayes's eye, a loaded look finally resolved by words instead of silence. "I thought refusing him would get my crew killed," she said. "Your boarders came through our own smoke and still took us alive. I testified because of that." Hayes gave a single nod. "Keep testifying. Truth is how your people keep what is left." 9 days after the verdict, Convoy Lane C through Ossuary Gate reopened under neutral and human joint custody. Nadim stood on Lantern Vale's observation deck as recovered remains from Kestrel Reach completed their interrupted route to the memorial docks at Ceres Anchorage. Families waited behind shield glass again, but this time, no one hid from the cameras. A Lum scholar, an avian envoy, and 2 former debtor system delegates stood with them, witnessing delivery crate by crate, seal by seal. Each transfer tone sounded soft and precise, like careful hands setting fragile things down. Mara Elian arrived in person with the final archive packet. Boarding footage, chain logs, witness statements, and certified incident chronology from first warning to surrender oath. She handed it to Nadim and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "All strange signals accounted," Ilian said. "Beacon activations traced, dormant statutes validated, escrow freeze vectors archived. Nothing lost to confusion. Nadim glanced up. And the calls we made? Everyone answered, Ilian said. Some answered late, none unanswered. By the second month of tribunal reconstruction, the Covenant of the Remembered entered final ratification debate. The chamber was full again, but the mood had changed from spectacle to engineering. Clause by clause, delegates codified prohibitions on remains trafficking, memorial piracy, coerced funerary liens, and salvage claims against protected dead lanes. Enforcement language became the true battleground until the scholars of LUM proposed an amendment that turned debate into decision. Permanent guarantor authority should go to the only power that proved both capacity and restraint under maximal provocation, their speaker said, humanity. The vote passed unanimous. Even the reorganized Krelix cooperatives, now under external compliance boards, voted yes. Mitchell signed for the Human Systems Compact beside Morrison and Hayes. No one smiled for the cameras. The act felt less like celebration and more like a foundation poured after fire. When the final signature locked, tribunal lights dimmed for 1 minute in memorial observance. A protocol once dismissed as primitive attachment and now mandatory chamber law. 1 year later, Thel Station's restitution hall filled with representatives from worlds that had lost dead to league trafficking audits. Ben stood behind transparent barrier glass in plain gray detainee uniform while names were read and compensation orders executed. Velcor testified publicly, then supervised cooperative asset transfers to families his former command had harmed. The legal officer from Profit's Mandate chaired a compliance office that taught new captains one lesson in the first hour. You do not build profit on unburied grief unless you intend to be buried by consequence. 10 years later, the old conflict lanes looked different from a distance and familiar up close. Memorial beacons still burned in ordered lines. Custodian buoys carried mixed crews. Krelix cooperatives traded legally under heavy audit and had not fielded a war fleet since dissolution. The avians of Kith ran open refuel sanctuaries. LUM archivists trained new species in chain integrity law. Human escort groups still passed through Ossuary Gate with whole names of the dead visible under muted starlight. And every passing warship, human or alien, dimmed lights in salute without being told. On a late watch aboard Quiet Resolve, now an Academy command ship, a cadet asked retired Admiral Hayes why human doctrine had never separated grief from strategy. Hayes looked out at the beacon line and answered as if stating weather. Because memory is how a civilization refuses erasure. We do not carry the dead to stay in the past. We carry them to keep our promises in the present. The cadet stood silent, absorbing it, while outside the ship the corridor lights dipped one by one as a convoy crossed the gate, undisturbed, escorted, and homebound.